Aureal Semiconductor was a multi-million-dollar company that made the best audio technology ever. So how did they miserably fail and vanish? Back in the day before surround sound and Dolby Atmos were a standard, Aureal Semiconductor invented the best audio technology ever and called it A3D. Unlike other companies that just added echoes to their cards, A3D actually calculated how the sound bounces from the walls and floors inside the game. It was a technology that gave users a realistic 3D sounds inside of games on computers. You could hear sounds coming from different directions in games like Quake and Half-Life, and there were many other games that supported the technology despite the requirements of the Vortex audio chips that Aureal produced at the time. What in the world could possibly destroy such a company? Well, there was another company called Creative Labs who were the creator of Sound Blaster, the undisputed king of the PC audio world. And when they saw A3D technology, they sued Aureal Semiconductor for patent infringement. And here is where the suing war started between the two companies. They were both suing each other heavily in hope that one of them is gonna win the case, and after an intense battle of suing each other, finally Aureal Semiconductor won the case. But at what cost? During this battle, investors didn't want to invest in Aureal Semiconductor, and PC manufacturers also stayed away. Also, Aureal was the smaller company compared to Creative Labs, and this case sucked up all of their money, so even though they won the battle, they lost the war and went bankrupt. Then their assets were sold to Creative Labs, their competitor and the company who sued them until they got broke. What a sad story, to be honest. Losing your company just because your competitor sued you until you got broke, and then your assets were sold to the same company that sued you until you got broke. Very harsh. And if you think that was brutal, wait until you hear the next ones. Back in 2005, Nintendo DS and Sony PSP were the kings of gaming handhelds, but a company called Tiger Telematics wanted a piece of that market, and so they made the Gizmondo, a gaming handheld that wasn't only capable of gaming, but it also had a built-in GPS for tracking maps, a built-in camera that can take videos and photos, and it was also capable of playing different forms of media, whether it's videos, music, or photos. And you can even use it to message your friends. It was kinda like a smartphone before smartphones were everywhere. So how did such a great device that provided way more features than its competition miserably fail? Going with all these features made the device pretty limited, as it was jack of all trades, master of none. It also ran an old Windows CE, and it only had 64 megabytes of storage, which was not a lot even back in 2005. So far, it seems like a normal handheld. But the story of its marketing is where it gets weird. Unlike any other handheld, the budget was mostly spent on the marketing rather than spending it on the actual product itself. More than $1.8 million were spent on the launch party, and then they opened a flagship store, and they even hired celebrities to advertise for the console. They went as far as to plan a full Formula 1 team just to market the device. Unfortunately, all of this led to the console arriving with just one game, which was called Trailblazer, and the device had really weird pricing because it launched at the price of $400, which was double the price of the Nintendo DS and the Sony PSP. Then Tiger Telematics released another version for $230, but that cheaper version would roll ads from time to time while you're playing, which is unacceptable for a handheld. Like, imagine you pay for the device, you pay for the games legally, and then you get ads. That is unacceptable. A question you might ask is, okay, but the device did provide other features like messaging or playing media or recording, so how did it still fail? Well, one of the executives of the company was actually linked to the Swedish mafia, which raised concerns about the company's management, and this same guy happened to crash a Ferrari Enzo, splitting it in half. And then he proceeded to fake the news, saying that it was a different driver in the car and not himself, which turned out to be false as there were no evidence for it. And the car wasn't even his property, it was obtained through questionable means, and ultimately this led to his arrest and conviction in the US. On top of all of this, the console only sold 25,000 units, which is pathetic for a console even at the time. They didn't even have enough money to pay for the marketing or the employees, which made the company be in a $300 million debt. And the Gizmondo, along with its companies, disappeared forever. You can get the device nowadays from $1,500 to $3,000 depending on who's selling it, and the reason is the rarity of the device, as there is only 25,000 units in the world and not all of them survived. Moral of the story: avoid crime and spend more on the product than you spend on the marketing of that product. Before Intel and AMD locked down the CPU market, there was a third player, a company called Cyrix, and for a brief moment in history, they actually made processors that put Intel to shame. It was the mid-1990s. Cyrix was the king of the budget PC. Their secret weapon? The 6x86 lineup. Instead of just cracking up clock speeds like Intel did, Cyrix designed their chips to be incredibly efficient. They crushed Intel in office work and productivity, and all of this at a fraction of the price. In fact, they were so confident, they stopped naming CPUs by megahertz. Instead, they used performance ratings. A chip labeled PR166 meant that it performs just like an Intel Pentium 166, even though its actual clock speeds were lower. It was basically brilliant marketing. But then the 3D gaming revolution arrived, and Cyrix never saw the train coming. These groundbreaking 3D games relied heavily on something called floating point math. It was a highly demanding calculation method, and it exposed a fatal flaw in Cyrix's architecture. Their floating point performance was abysmal. When Quake launched, the difference was night and day. On Intel Pentium, it ran beautifully. On Cyrix, it was a slideshow. To make matters worse, Quake was specifically optimized for Intel hardware. Almost overnight, Cyrix's reputation shattered. They went from the undisputed king of the budget PC builds to the CPUs that can't run Quake. It didn't matter that Cyrix beat Intel in every other daily task. Once the gaming community labeled Cyrix's CPUs as slow, the word spread like wildfire, and soon, even ordinary office users who have never played a game in their lives started avoiding Cyrix, fearing they were buying inferior tech in comparison to Intel Pentium. Sales crumbled, and by the time Cyrix's engineers managed to fix the floating point issue, the damage was done. The company collapsed financially, and in 1997, Cyrix was sold to National Semiconductor before it was also picked up by VIA Technologies, and just like that, a tech giant killer faded into obscurity. If you plan on making a CPU, just make sure it can run Quake, so you don't end up like Cyrix.